In 1835, there was a woman science feared, and her story was buried so deep, it took nearly 200 years for anyone to find the truth. Maya Chin was just a failing grad student, 28 years old, drowning in debt, about to lose everything she'd worked for. Her professor hated her research, her dissertation was falling apart. She was ready to give up on her dreams. Then her great-aunt died and left her a house in Salem, Massachusetts. Maya thought it was just old family junk, but hidden in a locked trunk in the dusty attic, she found something that would change history forever. 3 leather journals from 1835. Written by Elizabeth Whitmore, Maya's own ancestor. But these weren't just old diaries. Elizabeth had been documenting scientific discoveries about evolution and how species change over time, the same theories that made Charles Darwin famous. Except Elizabeth wrote them 24 years before Darwin ever published his work. Maya couldn't believe what she was reading. This woman, her own family, had understood evolution decades before the man who got all the credit in history books. Elizabeth was a genius who'd been completely erased from science. Maya thought she'd found the discovery of a lifetime. Her failing career could be saved. She could rewrite history and give Elizabeth the recognition she deserved. But within hours of sharing her discovery, Maya's world turned into a living nightmare. A mysterious man appeared in her professor's office, claiming the journals were dangerous forgeries. Maya's research got suspended. Anonymous threats started showing up at her door. Stop digging or face serious consequences. Maya realized she hadn't just found family history. She'd stumbled into a conspiracy that had been running for 2 centuries. Someone had been systematically destroying Elizabeth's legacy, and they were willing to destroy anyone who tried to expose the truth. The threats got worse. Maya's roommate Jessica suddenly disappeared. A voice on the phone made it crystal clear: return the journals, or Jessica would pay the price. But here's where things get really crazy. The man threatening Maya? He wasn't who he claimed to be. The foundation he said he worked for, it didn't even exist anymore. Maya had uncovered something much bigger than family secrets. She'd exposed a massive corporate conspiracy involving textbook companies, universities, and powerful people who had spent decades silencing researchers just like her. Why? Because Elizabeth's story threatened a multi-billion-dollar industry built on lies. You see, if Elizabeth Whitmore got credit for discovering evolution first, textbook companies would have to rewrite millions of books. Universities would have to change their entire curriculum. It would cost them massive amounts of money. So they've been covering it up for generations, destroying careers, intimidating researchers, even kidnapping people to keep their secrets safe. Elizabeth Whitmore had died in an asylum at age 31. Her own brother declared her mentally unstable for wanting credit for her own scientific work. He stole her research and built a fortune on her genius. For 200 years, that crime stayed hidden, until Maya found those journals. Now she had a choice: give up and let Elizabeth stay buried forever, or fight back against an enemy with unlimited money, political power, and a proven willingness to destroy lives. The people trying to stop Maya had been perfecting the art of silencing women for 2 centuries. They had resources she couldn't imagine. They had spies in universities. They had corrupt officials on their payroll. And Maya? She was just one graduate student with a handful of old journals. But Elizabeth had left her a message across the centuries. If my voice is silenced, may another woman find these words and speak for all of us who dared to think. Maya found those words. The question is, would she be brave enough to speak them? Because when you're fighting people who've spent 200 years burying brilliant women, how do you make sure the truth finally wins? And what happens when the woman science feared gets her chance to fight back from beyond the grave? Maya's second-hand Honda Civic protests with mechanical wheezes as she navigates Salem's narrow streets past tourist shops selling witch-themed merchandise that capitalize on the town's dark history. The morning air carries salt from the harbor mixed with decomposing autumn leaves, creating an atmosphere that feels suspended between past and present, reality and legend. 1847 Chestnut Street stands apart from its gentrified neighbors like an elderly relative who refuses modern makeovers. Victorian gingerbread trim frames windows that peer like watchful eyes, while ivy claims more territory each passing season. Paint peels from weathered clapboard siding in deliberate strips, as if the structure itself resists contemporary renovation efforts. Maya studies the property deed, cross-referencing the address with her phone's GPS. Her great-aunt Margaret had lived here alone for 60 years, emerging only for grocery runs and library visits that locals described as ritualistic in their precision. Maya remembers holiday cards with pressed flowers and careful handwriting, but no family visits or lengthy phone conversations. Margaret Chen Whitmore, she'd kept both surnames after marriage, had been the family's eccentric scholar, collecting advanced degrees in anthropology and women's studies, while other relatives pursued practical careers in medicine and engineering. The brass nameplate beside the front door reads, M. Hitmore, in serif lettering that speaks to deliberate preservation of identity. The surname gives Maya pause, triggering half-remembered conversations about distant English ancestry on Margaret's maternal side. Family genealogy had never interested Maya until this moment, when inheritance transforms curiosity into necessity. The door opens with surprising ease, revealing hardwood floors covered by Persian rugs worn thin by decades of solitary footsteps. Built-in bookshelves line every wall, packed with volumes on botanical illustration, scientific history, and feminist scholarship that creates an atmosphere of scholarly meditation. The air holds traces of lavender and old paper, creating an olfactory museum of intellectual devotion. Maya moves through rooms that feel like carefully curated exhibits. Margaret's mahogany desk remains exactly as left. Fountain pen beside half-finished correspondence, reading glasses folded atop a biography of Rosalind Franklin. A wedding photograph from the 1960s shows Margaret in modest white attire beside a kind-faced man Maya doesn't recognize from family stories. The conspicuous absence of children's photos or extended family portraits emphasizes Margaret's intentional solitude. The kitchen preserves 1950-ish charm with mint green appliances and checkered linoleum that speaks to deliberate resistance against modern updates. A handwritten note waits on the counter, addressed to Maya in Margaret's distinctive penmanship that combines precision with artistic flourish. Dear Maya, if you're reading this, I've finally joined the ancestors whose voices I've spent my lifetime trying to preserve. The trunk in the attic holds our family's most important secret, one that powerful people have worked for generations to suppress. Use the brass key, but prepare yourself emotionally and intellectually. Some truths carry weight that changes everything we thought we understood about history, justice, and the price of speaking inconvenient truths. The password for my computer is Silenced Voices 1835. Trust your instincts above all authority. Trust the evidence above all established narratives. Trust that women's voices, however deeply buried, eventually rise to demand recognition. The fight you are about to inherit began long before either of us was born. But perhaps it can end with your generation's courage. Aunt Margaret. Maya reads the note 3 times, memorizing each word while processing the implications of inheritance that extends beyond property into responsibility. Margaret's laptop, a modern device incongruous among vintage furnishings, sits closed on the kitchen table beside carefully organized stacks of printed research articles about 19th century women scientists, their contributions, and the systematic erasure of their achievements from official historical records. The attic stairs creak under Maya's weight as she ascends toward filtered sunlight streaming through dormer windows. Dust motes dance in golden beams like suspended secrets, creating an almost sacred atmosphere around scattered boxes and sheet-covered furniture that speaks to decades of careful preservation. In the center of the space sits an ornate steamer trunk, its brass corners tarnished green with age and travel stickers from London, Paris, and Boston, dating to the 1830s. Maya approaches with archaeological reverence, sensing that opening this container will fundamentally alter her life's trajectory in ways she cannot yet comprehend. The trunk's leather exterior bears scars from 2 centuries of careful handling, suggesting contents too precious for casual storage. Her hands shake slightly as she inserts the brass key into an intricate lock mechanism that clicks open with satisfying precision. The lid reveals treasure wrapped in yellow tissue paper. 3 leather-bound journals tied with faded ribbon, accompanied by loose papers covered in spidery handwriting, pressed botanical specimens, and detailed scientific illustrations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of plant structures and adaptation mechanisms. Maya lifts the first journal with archaeological care, noting how the leather has softened with age while maintaining structural integrity. The cover bears an embossed name, E. M. Whitmore, 1835. She opens to the first page where elegant script introduces the author with defiant determination. I am Elizabeth Margaret Whitmore, daughter of Jonathan Whitmore of Boston, Massachusetts. Though society denies women the privilege of scientific inquiry, I shall document my observations with the hope that future generations might recognize truth regardless of its source. If Charles Darwin may theorize about species adaptation based on distant island observations, surely I may contribute insights gleaned from intimate study of New England's forests, where I have spent countless hours observing phenomena that established science either ignores or misinterprets through the lens of masculine presumption. Maya's breath catches as she realizes the historical significance of what she's discovered. This journal predates Darwin's Origin of Species by 24 years, yet contains observations about natural selection, adaptation, and species variation that wouldn't be officially discovered until decades later. He flips through pages filled with detailed documentation that grows more urgent as entries progress, revealing Elizabeth's increasing frustration with male colleagues who dismissed her theories while appropriating her research for their own advancement. A loose photograph falls from the journal's pages. A formal portrait of a young woman in 1830s dress, whose eyes hold intelligence and defiance that transcends historical distance. The resemblance to Maya's own features proves unmistakable. The same dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, and determined jawline that speaks across generations of shared determination. Maya transforms her cramped university carrel into a research command center, surrounding herself with photocopies of Elizabeth's pages connected by colored string like a detective's investigation board. Her laptop displays multiple browser tabs, genealogy websites, historical archives, and scientific databases, as she attempts to verify Elizabeth's extraordinary claims about evolutionary theory. The evidence proves overwhelming and historically revolutionary. Elizabeth Whitmore had documented species adaptation theories with scientific precision that wouldn't be officially discovered until Darwin's publications decades later. Her observations about natural selection, environmental pressures, and plant variation demonstrate rigorous methodology that surpasses many contemporary male naturalists whose work filled respected scientific journals. 3 sleepless days of research convince Maya she's discovered the find of a lifetime, irrefutable proof that a brilliant woman had understood evolution's fundamental principles years before the men who received historical credit. Her failing dissertation could transform into groundbreaking scholarship that establishes her as a legitimate academic while correcting centuries of historical injustice. At 2:47 a.m., energized despite exhaustion, Maya drafts an email to Dr. James Harrison, a Harvard historian whose published work on suppressed women scientists had appeared repeatedly in her research. She attaches high-resolution scans of Elizabeth's most significant observations, her heart racing with anticipation of academic vindication and professional salvation. The response arrives with disturbing speed and ominous urgency. Dr. Harrison warns that her discovery is remarkable but deeply concerning, demanding an immediate meeting at the Cambridge Public Library's main reading room. His instructions seem paranoid. Come alone, bring only photocopies, trust no one else with this information until they can discuss the implications safely. Before Maya can process this unexpected warning, her phone rings, with Dr. Patricia Vance's name appearing on the screen alongside a photo that makes Maya's stomach clench with familiar dread. Her advisor's voice carries controlled anger that suggests serious professional consequences. Maya's attempt to explain her absence from their scheduled meeting gets interrupted by Dr. Vance's cold announcement that they have a serious problem requiring immediate resolution. The conversation ends abruptly when Maya mentions strengthening her dissertation through new historical research, leaving her confused about what could constitute academic misconduct in legitimate archival investigation. Maya arrives at Dr. Vance's office to discover she faces more than academic criticism. A man in an expensive suit occupies one of the visitor chairs, his presence immediately uncomfortable in ways that suggest power and potential threat. Dr. Vance introduces him as Richard Whitmore III from the Whitmore Foundation, whose appearance seems impossibly coordinated with Maya's recent discovery. Richard stands with predatory grace, extending a manicured hand that Maya reluctantly shakes, while noting how his smile never reaches calculating eyes. He claims Maya has come into possession of historical materials that rightfully belong to his foundation, suggesting legal and ethical complications she hadn't anticipated. When Maya asserts her inheritance rights to family materials, Richard produces prepared documentation, suggesting the materials contain fabricated information designed to discredit established scientific history. His foundation, he claims, has spent considerable resources protecting the public from historical hoaxes that damage legitimate scholarly discourse. Speed and coordination of this response reveals planning that preceded Maya sharing her discovery with anyone. Richard presents legal documents describing the materials as 1,920 forgeries created for early feminist propaganda campaigns, thoroughly debunked by legitimate historians, whose reputations the Foundation has protected through vigilant oversight. Maya's confusion deepens as she realizes the sophistication of this coordinated response. Richard's knowledge of her research, his coordination with Dr. Vance, and his prepared legal arguments suggest surveillance and preparation that began before she'd contacted any scholars or institutions about her findings. Dr. Vance announces the suspension of Maya's research privileges pending resolution of misconduct allegations, effectively cutting her access to the institutional resources necessary for continuing her investigation. Richard offers to have the materials professionally examined, but only after they're returned to proper Foundation custody. The trap becomes clear as Maya recognizes she's walked into a carefully orchestrated response designed to discredit her discovery before it can gain academic traction. Richard's veiled threats about academic careers being fragile things that could suffer unfortunate damage demonstrate the Foundation's willingness to destroy professional prospects for researchers who challenge their preferred narratives. As Maya leaves the office, her phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or face consequences. The message's timing, arriving immediately after her confrontation with Foundation representatives, confirms her growing suspicion that she stumbled into something far more dangerous than academic politics. Standing in the university hallway that once felt like home, surrounded by institutional settings that previously represented intellectual freedom and scholarly pursuit, Maya realizes her discovery has awakened forces that have been protecting their secrets for nearly 2 centuries. The weight of Elizabeth's journals in her bag feels heavier now, carrying not just historical significance but contemporary danger. The implications begin crystallizing as Maya processes the coordinated nature of the response. Someone has been monitoring communications about Elizabeth Whitmore for decades, prepared to deploy immediate countermeasures against anyone who threatens to expose inconvenient truths about scientific history and the systematic suppression of women's contributions. Maya's simple family history investigation has revealed institutional conspiracy that extends far beyond her personal research interests. Elizabeth's story represents a threat to carefully constructed narratives that powerful people have spent generations protecting through intimidation, legal harassment, and professional destruction of anyone who dares question established historical records. Walking across campus toward an uncertain future, Maya understands she faces a choice between academic survival and historical justice. Surrendering the Elizabeth's materials might preserve her career prospects, but abandoning her ancestors' legacy would perpetuate the very silence that destroyed Elizabeth's recognition 2 centuries earlier. The brass key in Maya's pocket feels warm against her fingers, a tangible connection to family courage that spans generations. Elizabeth had risked everything to document scientific truth despite social prohibition. Maya must decide whether contemporary threats will silence another generation of women's voices, or whether Elizabeth's courage can inspire the fight for recognition that her brilliant ancestor never lived to see. The shadows lengthening across campus seem to whisper warnings about the price of challenging institutional power. But Maya's reflection in library windows shows Elizabeth's determined features staring back across centuries of suppressed truth, demanding justice that has waited far too long for courage to speak its name. The Cambridge Public Library's main reading room feels like a sanctuary after Maya's confrontation with institutional power, its high ceilings and wooden tables creating an atmosphere of scholarly protection that Maya desperately needs. Dr. James Harrison, 73 years old with Einstein-wild hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, occupies a corner table surrounded by manila folders and legal pads covered in his cramped handwriting that speaks to decades of careful documentation. Maya approaches with the cautious reverence of someone entering sacred space, carrying only photocopies as Harrison instructed, while noting how his eyes continuously scan the reading room for potential listeners. His paranoia feels justified, given her morning's experience with coordinated institutional retaliation that arrived with impossible speed and preparation. Harrison's assessment proves immediately accurate. Maya looks like someone who has just discovered the world operates according to rules far more dangerous than she ever imagined. His welcoming gesture toward the wooden chair opposite him comes with whispered warnings about keeping voices low, because they're dealing with people who have very long reaches and very few moral scruples about using them. The thick folder Harrison slides across the table contains newspaper clippings, academic articles, and photographs spanning nearly a century of systematic suppression. Maya opens it to find documentation of a pattern that makes her blood run cold. Researchers who discovered inconvenient historical truths suddenly facing academic misconduct charges, funding cuts, or personal attacks that destroyed their credibility and professional prospects. Each case involves materials that challenged established scientific history, particularly regarding women's contributions that had been systematically erased from official records. The Foundation hadn't just perfected the art of discrediting individual researchers. They had created an entire ecosystem of supporters, whose livelihoods depended on maintaining approved historical interpretations. Harrison reveals his own tragic trajectory with the measured tone of someone who has processed decades of professional trauma. In 1987, his doctoral dissertation on female botanists led him to archival references about Elizabeth Whitmore. The moment he requested access to Foundation archives, his funding mysteriously disappeared, and his advisor suddenly discovered serious methodological flaws that required complete dissertation revision. The Foundation's retaliation proved systematic and devastating. Harrison spent 10 years in academic purgatory, teaching adjunct courses at community colleges, while Foundation influence systematically blocked his job applications at major universities. He eventually found sanctuary at Harvard by focusing on safer historical topics while conducting his real research in secret, building evidence files that documented institutional corruption across multiple decades. But Harrison had never stopped collecting evidence or hoping for someone with direct access to Elizabeth's original materials. His home study, which he describes with bitter pride, resembles a private investigation headquarters where file cabinets map Foundation influence across academic institutions, publishing houses, and scientific journals that create an interconnected web of narrative control. The Foundation's reach extends far beyond academic circles into legal and financial networks that enable comprehensive suppression campaigns. They don't just suppress inconvenient research, they actively promote narratives supporting their version of history through strategic funding of textbook publishers, research grants, and endowed academic positions that create financial dependence on maintaining approved interpretations. Harrison produces a battered journal from his briefcase, its leather cover cracked with age and careful handling. This belonged to Jonathan Whitmore, Elizabeth's brother, acquired from an estate sale in 1995 when Harrison was building his secret documentation of family crimes. The entry for December 15, 1835 describes Jonathan's decision with chilling casualness that reveals period attitudes toward inconvenient women. Maya reads Jonathan's handwriting with growing horror as he documents his consultation with Dr. Stevens about Elizabeth's deteriorating mental state. Her increasing agitation about receiving recognition for botanical observations has progressed beyond reasonable female concerns into dangerous territory that threatens family reputation and social standing within Boston's elite circles. Jonathan's description of signing commitment papers presents institutionalization as merciful intervention rather than systematic suppression. Elizabeth's research notes would be safeguarded from her destructive impulses, while she received proper medical attention for mental deterioration that made her unsuitable for normal social interaction. The medical records Harrison obtained through decades of research reveal Elizabeth's actual fate with heartbreaking precision. She died in Worcester State Hospital 6 months after commitment, officially from consumption, though contemporary notes suggest malnutrition and despair contributed significantly to her decline. Her brilliant mind, capable of understanding evolutionary principles decades before they gained scientific acceptance, was destroyed by institutional forces that could not tolerate intellectual independence in women. Jonathan had built his scientific reputation by presenting Elizabeth's theories as his own work, carefully edited to remove any reference to their true source. The Whitmore family fortune originated from patents based on botanical discoveries that Elizabeth had documented in painstaking detail, then stolen by a brother who viewed her genius as family property rather than individual achievement. Harrison's documentation reveals how 2 centuries of wealth and influence grew from this foundational theft. Everything the foundation had achieved, their academic influence, political connections, and financial resources, rested on intellectual property stolen from a woman whose voice was permanently silenced through systematic institutional abuse. The magnitude of injustice spans generations, connecting Elizabeth's 19th century suppression to Maya's contemporary struggles with academic institutions that continue marginalizing women's contributions through subtler but equally effective methods. The Foundation's modern tactics represent evolution rather than revolution, adapting historical suppression techniques to contemporary contexts while maintaining the same fundamental goal of narrative control. As Maya processes the systematic nature of this multi-generational conspiracy, her phone buzzes with a text message that makes Harrison's expression darken immediately. His contact at the university reports that campus security has begun actively searching for Maya, suggesting the Foundation's escalation timeline has accelerated beyond their expectations. Harrison's guidance toward his aging Volvo comes with constantly checking for surveillance that proves justified when Maya notices a black sedan parked across the street. Its occupants watch their movements with professional interest that confirms the Foundation's resources extend far beyond academic influence into private security and physical monitoring capabilities. The drive through Cambridge's winding streets becomes a lesson in counter-surveillance, as Harrison takes unexpected turns designed to reveal following vehicles. The black sedan maintains distant but consistent contact, demonstrating surveillance sophistication that makes Maya realize she's entered a world where intellectual discovery triggers responses typically reserved for national security threats. Harrison's Victorian house, surrounded by overgrown gardens that provide natural screening from observation, serves as headquarters for resistance that has lasted longer than most people's entire careers. His study reveals the true scope of documentation he has assembled, evidence that could destroy the Foundation's credibility if presented through proper channels that haven't been compromised by their influence. But Maya's presence represents unprecedented opportunity combined with extraordinary danger. She possesses primary source materials that cannot be discredited through the Foundation's usual methods, making her simultaneously their greatest threat and most vulnerable target. The Foundation's desperation will manifest in escalation tactics that Harrison has witnessed destroy other researchers who pose less significant challenges to their narrative control. Dr. Elena Rodrigo's laboratory at MIT resembles a fusion of archaeology and aerospace engineering. where pristine white surfaces hold sophisticated microscopes, spectrometers, and computer equipment capable of analyzing molecular structures of historical materials with unprecedented precision. Elena moves through her domain with scientist's intensity, her 45 years of experience evident in precise movements that waste no motion while conducting analyses that could definitively establish Elizabeth's journals as authentic historical documents. Maya watches with nervous anticipation as Elena runs tests she doesn't fully understand. Carbon dating of paper fibers, ink spectroscopy that reveals chemical compositions, handwriting authentication using mathematical algorithms that compare letter formations across thousands of historical samples. The scientific rigor feels reassuring after days of institutional intimidation that relied on authority rather than evidence to discredit her discovery. Elena's preliminary results confirm what Maya hoped but hardly dared believe. The journals represent authentic 1830s materials containing textile fibers consistent with New England manufacturing of that specific period. The ink shows proper oxidation patterns for iron gall formulations that were standard for educated correspondence in the 1830s. The handwriting demonstrates consistency across multiple entries that would be impossible to forge using techniques available during any historical period when such forgery might have been attempted. But Elena's analysis reveals something more disturbing than authentication could resolve. Several pages show evidence of careful removal using surgical precision sometime in the early 20th century. The cuts are too precise for natural damage or accidental loss, suggesting targeted content deletion by someone who knew exactly what information needed to be eliminated from Elizabeth's record. Maya feels sick imagining Elizabeth's descendants systematically erasing portions of her legacy across multiple generations, demonstrating institutional commitment to suppression that spans centuries of coordinated effort. The calculated nature of this historical vandalism reveals multi-generational planning designed to preserve family reputation while obliterating evidence of foundational crimes. Elena's official analysis report, sealed in documentation that would satisfy any legitimate academic review, provides scientific proof that Richard Whitmore's forgery claims represent deliberate misrepresentation designed to discredit authentic historical materials. Elizabeth Whitmore emerges from Elena's analysis as a pioneering scientist whose contributions were systematically suppressed through methods that extended far beyond social prejudice into criminal destruction of evidence. But Maya's relief at obtaining irrefutable scientific validation proves short-lived when Harrison arrives with expressions that suggest their problems have escalated beyond academic retaliation into personal danger territory. His contact network, developed through decades of investigating Foundation activities, reports concerning developments that threaten everyone involved in exposing their suppression activity. Maya's phone rings, with Jessica's name appearing on the screen, but the voice that responds carries Richard Whitmore's controlled menace instead of her roommate's familiar warmth. The revelation that they have somehow captured Jessica transforms Maya's academic struggle into personal nightmare, where intellectual pursuit endangers innocent people who trusted her judgment. Richard's explanation of Jessica's situation as helping them demonstrate consequences of continued interference reveals Foundation willingness to escalate from professional retaliation to criminal activity. Their demand for complete surrender of all materials by 6 p.m. carries implicit threats about Jessica's continued safety that force Maya to confront the true stakes of challenging institutional power. Harrison's whispered advice against agreeing to demands reflects his understanding of Foundation tactics, developed through observing their treatment of other researchers over multiple decades. Compliance rarely ensures safety for anyone involved, because the Foundation's pattern involves eliminating all potential witnesses to their suppression activities, regardless of cooperation levels. Richard's warning that Harrison's advice has already cost several people their careers and personal safety demonstrates the Foundation's comprehensive surveillance of anyone who challenges their narrative control. Their knowledge of private conversations and strategic planning reveals information-gathering capabilities that extend far beyond normal corporate intelligence operations. End quote. The speed of Jessica's capture suggests Foundation preparation that began before Maya shared her discovery with any external researchers, indicating surveillance systems designed to monitor potential threats and respond with immediate suppression tactics. Their operational sophistication demonstrates resources and commitment that treat historical suppression as warfare, requiring military-level planning and execution. Detective Sarah Martinez's office at Cambridge Police Station provides Maya's first encounter with law enforcement that might be capable of challenging Foundation influence, though her initial skepticism about historical Foundation crimes reflects the difficulty of convincing authorities that academic disputes warrant criminal investigation. Her desk displays photos of successfully solved cases alongside personal images that suggest genuine commitment to protecting victims from institutional abuse. Maya's explanation of Foundation activities sounds increasingly implausible even to her own ears, as she describes kidnapping motivated by 19th century scientific documents, but Harrison's documentation provides corroborating evidence that transforms seemingly paranoid theories into documented patterns of criminal behavior spanning multiple decades. Detective Martinez's examination of evidence Maya provides, Dr. Rodriguez's authentication report, copies of threatening messages, and Harrison's files documenting Foundation activities, reveals the systematic nature of suppression campaigns that have operated beneath law enforcement attention through careful selection of victims who lack credibility or resources to pursue justice effectively. Martinez's warning about Foundation legal and political connections reflects realistic assessment of challenges involved in prosecuting individuals with unlimited resources and influential supporters. Their ability to fight investigations with expensive lawyers and political pressure creates obstacles that require exceptional evidence and careful strategic planning to overcome successfully. But Maya's case presents unprecedented opportunity because Foundation tactics have finally escalated into criminal territory that cannot be dismissed as academic disputes or civil disagreements. Kidnapping crosses legal lines that even the Foundation's political connections cannot manipulate away through normal influence channels. Martinez's commitment to pursuing aggressive investigation while maintaining Maya's safety reflects professional understanding that institutional predators must be challenged when they demonstrate willingness to use violence against researchers whose only crime involves seeking historical truth. Her experience with complex cases provides strategic guidance for navigating legal challenges while building prosecutable evidence. The Foundation's monitoring of police communications, revealed through Richard's immediate awareness of Maya's law enforcement contact, demonstrates corruption that extends into official channels designed to protect public safety. Their infiltration of institutions meant to provide protection forces Maya to question whether anyone can be trusted. When institutional power has unlimited resources for purchasing loyalty, Harrison's decades of investigation suddenly reveal their true value, as Foundation desperation triggers mistakes that expose operational methods they have successfully concealed for generations. Their escalation from subtle intimidation to obvious criminal activity creates opportunities for building legal cases that could finally bring justice for centuries of systematic suppression. Jessica's phone call, carefully monitored to demonstrate her safety while maintaining psychological pressure, reveals Foundation understanding of emotional manipulation designed to force compliance through personal attachment rather than direct threats. Their sophisticated approach to coercion demonstrates experience with breaking researchers who might resist professional intimidation but cannot ignore dangers to people they care about. Richard's midnight deadline creates artificial urgency, designed to prevent careful planning or consultation with additional supporters who might complicate Foundation damage control efforts. The time pressure represents standard intimidation tactics, refined through decades of successfully suppressing inconvenient discoveries before they gain public attention. Detective Martinez's urgent call arrives at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes before Richard's deadline, carrying information that fundamentally alters Maya's understanding of everything she thought she knew about the conspiracy threatening her life and Jessica's safety. The detective's request for an immediate meeting, including Dr. Harrison, suggests developments that require complete reassessment of their strategic planning. Standing outside 425 Beacon Street at midnight, Maya confronts the first shock that begins unraveling her assumptions about the Foundation's power and influence. The building that Richard specified for the exchange appears completely dark, with no vehicles occupying surrounding streets and no signs indicating Foundation presence or surveillance activities. Detective Martinez's revelation that the Whitmore Foundation office has been registered to this address, but the building has remained vacant for 6 months, creates immediate confusion about Richard's motivations and operational capabilities. No one has been at this location tonight, suggesting that Richard's demands were designed to create compliance rather than actual material transfer. The fundamental impossibility of Richard's instructions, bringing materials to a location he doesn't control, indicates either operational incompetence or deliberate misdirection designed to serve purposes Maya cannot yet understand. The realization that she has been responding to phantom threats forces complete re-examination of every assumption about Foundation activities and intentions. Detective Martinez's laptop displays investigation results that transform Maya's understanding of the entire conspiracy, with revelations that shake the foundation of everything she believed about Richard's identity and motivations. The official records she accesses through law enforcement databases reveal documentation that contradicts fundamental assumptions about who has been threatening Maya and why. Richard Whitmore III died in a car accident in 2019. 3 years before Maya's discovery of Elizabeth's journals. The Whitmore Foundation dissolved following his death, with remaining assets transferred to various historical preservation organizations that continue legitimate scholarly work without the suppression activities that characterized earlier Foundation operations. The man who threatened Maya's career and orchestrated Jessica's kidnapping is Thomas Fletcher, a private security consultant with documented history of corporate espionage and intimidation campaigns conducted on behalf of clients, whose identities often remain concealed through complex contractual arrangements designed to protect their reputations while enabling illegal activity. Maya's confusion deepens as she processes the implications of this identity deception. If the Foundation dissolved years ago and Richard is dead, then who hired Fletcher to orchestrate this sophisticated suppression campaign? What institutional interests are threatened by Elizabeth's recognition that would justify such elaborate and expensive operations? Detective Martinez's financial investigation reveals the answer through digital breadcrumbs that lead to corporate entities with far greater resources and motivation than family foundations protecting historical legacies. Following money trails exposes that Fletcher's intimidation services were contracted by Meridian Academic Publishing, the corporation that produces most American university textbooks and educational materials. The scope of conspiracy expands beyond family legacy protection into corporate profit preservation, as Maya realizes she has threatened not just historical reputation, but an entire industry built on controlled narratives that generate billions of dollars through textbook sales to educational institutions worldwide. Elizabeth Whitmore's recognition would trigger demands for curriculum revisions, textbook corrections, and potentially massive legal liability for educational malpractice claims. Meridian's business model depends on maintaining stable, controllable historical interpretations that don't require expensive content revisions or acknowledgement of systematic bias in educational materials. Each time someone discovers evidence contradicting established textbook narratives, the company faces potential liability for decades of educational content that omitted or misrepresented women's scientific contributions. Detective Martinez's revelation about Jessica's true identity delivers the final shock that completely reframes Maya's understanding of her situation and the forces protecting her from corporate retaliation. Jessica isn't just a roommate struggling through social work graduate school. She's an undercover FBI agent assigned to monitor potential domestic terrorism threats against academic institutions. Jessica has been tracking corporate suppression of historical research for 2 years as part of federal investigation into systematic obstruction of academic freedom that affects researchers across multiple disciplines and institutions. Maya's discovery of Elizabeth's journals triggered federal interest because it represents the most comprehensive evidence yet documented of institutional conspiracy to suppress scholarly investigation. The FBI has been building cases against Meridian Academic Publishing and associated networks for months, documenting intimidation campaigns that target researchers whose discoveries threaten corporate interests in maintaining educational content monopolies. Maya's experience represents the culmination of patterns affecting dozens of scholars whose careers were destroyed for challenging established narratives. Maya's relief at learning Jessica's safety mixes with betrayal at discovering her closest friend has been conducting surveillance throughout their friendship, monitoring Maya's research activities while maintaining elaborate deception about her identity and motivations. The revelation that their entire relationship was constructed for investigative purposes forces Maya to question her judgment about trusting anyone involved in this conspiracy. But Jessica's explanation reveals that her assignment focused on protection rather than surveillance, monitoring threats against researchers investigating suppressed women's history while building evidence necessary for prosecuting corporate entities that use intimidation to maintain narrative control. Maya's case provided the final evidence needed to file comprehensive charges against networks operating across multiple institutions. Federal interest in Maya's discovery stems from recognition that corporate suppression represents systematic violation of academic freedom that threatens constitutional principles underlying educational institutions. The government's involvement transforms personal struggle into national security investigation, with resources capable of challenging corporate power effectively. The multiple layers of deception surrounding Maya's research, Richard's false identity, the dissolved foundation, Jessica's undercover status, and corporate involvement demonstrate how personal discovery triggered responses from institutional forces operating at levels far beyond individual researcher capabilities. Maya's simple family history investigation revealed federal crimes spanning multiple jurisdictions and affecting dozens of victims. As Maya absorbs these revelations, she realizes Elizabeth's story has become catalyst for exposing modern institutional crimes that extend far beyond historical suppression into contemporary violations of academic freedom. Her ancestors' silenced voice will finally bring justice, not just for historical wrongs, but for ongoing corporate abuse of researchers whose discoveries threaten profitable narratives. The FBI's Boston field office buzzes with coordinated activity as federal agents prepare to execute simultaneous raids against Meridian Academic Publishing and their extensive network of academic collaborators, corporate subsidiaries, and private contractors who have enabled decades of systematic suppression activities. Maya sits in a secure conference room surrounded by evidence boards displaying 2 centuries of institutional crimes. Feeling overwhelmed by the scope of conspiracy her simple research discovery has exposed. Special Agent Jessica Martinez. Maya continues struggling to reconcile her roommate's familiar presence with professional federal agent identity. Briefs the multi-jurisdictional operation team while Maya and Dr. Harrison provide historical context crucial for understanding the criminal patterns that connect 19th century suppression to contemporary corporate espionage. Investigation spans 14 universities, 23 individual researchers, and multiple government archives that have been compromised through Foundation influence. Maya examines surveillance photographs of Thomas Fletcher and his associates, recognizing several faces from her university's administration, whose betrayal adds personal dimension to institutional corruption. The revelation that people she trusted were actively working to destroy her career transforms academic frustration into profound disillusionment about the integrity of educational institutions she had devoted her life to serving. Agent Martinez displays timeline evidence showing how Meridian Publishing acquired textbook companies throughout the 20th century, gradually consolidating control over educational narratives through strategic mergers that created virtual monopoly over academic content distribution. Their business model requires maintaining stable historical interpretations that avoid expensive revision cycles triggered by inconvenient discoveries about suppressed contributions. The federal investigation has identified 47 cases of systematic harassment, career destruction, and physical intimidation targeting researchers whose discoveries contradicted established textbook narratives. Maya's case provides unique evidence because Elizabeth's authenticated journals offer irrefutable proof of historical fraud that cannot be dismissed through corporate legal maneuvering or academic reputation attacks. Each documented suppression represents potential federal civil rights violation where corporate entities used intimidation to prevent scholarly investigation, protected under constitutional academic freedom principles. The pattern demonstrates systematic conspiracy to obstruct educational progress through methods that violate multiple federal statutes regarding interference with scientific research and institutional corruption. Maya realizes she represents more than individual victims seeking personal vindication. She embodies the voices of generations of silenced researchers whose contributions were systematically erased to maintain profitable historical narratives. Elizabeth's recognition could trigger comprehensive re-examination of educational content that exposes decades of institutional bias embedded in textbook development processes. Harrison's documentation provides crucial evidence linking historical suppression patterns to contemporary corporate activities, demonstrating continuity of methods across generations of perpetrators who adapted techniques while maintaining fundamental goals of narrative control. His persistence preserved evidence that enables prosecution of crimes spanning multiple decades and jurisdictions. The operational timeline displayed on Agent Martinez's computer requires unprecedented coordination between federal agents, academic institutions, and news organizations to ensure simultaneous exposure that prevents evidence destruction or witness intimidation. Meridian's demonstrated willingness to use extreme measures necessitates comprehensive approach that neutralizes their capacity for retaliation before they can respond effectively. Before all eventually agree that similar risk reduction is necessary, before they can respond effectively, Maya reviews her prepared media statement, carefully crafted to explain Elizabeth's scientific contributions while highlighting institutional patterns that affected countless researchers across multiple generations. The language must remain accessible to general audiences while maintaining scholarly accuracy that supports federal prosecution efforts requiring public understanding and support. Agent Martinez explains how Maya's testimony will anchor criminal cases by providing human narrative that demonstrates real-world impact of corporate suppression on individual lives and educational integrity. Elizabeth's story transforms abstract legal concepts into compelling personal account of institutional abuse that spans centuries but continues affecting contemporary researchers. The sophisticated nature of Meridian's suppression network requires federal response that addresses corporate headquarters, university collaborators, and private contractors simultaneously to prevent coordinated destruction of evidence or elimination of witnesses who could support prosecution efforts. Their resources and political connections demand comprehensive strategy that overwhelms their capacity for damage control. Maya's phone contains secure contact information for investigative journalists Harrison identified as independent from corporate influence, requiring precise coordination to maximize public impact while protecting ongoing investigations from interference by media outlets, compromised through Meridian's advertising relationships or direct ownership connections. Harrison's decades of cultivation relationships with independent journalists creates media network capable of presenting Elizabeth's story to audiences worldwide while exposing corporate patterns that affect educational institutions internationally. The timing requires synchronization across multiple time zones to ensure comprehensive coverage before corporate interests can coordinate suppression efforts. As midnight approaches, Maya prepares to transform her private family discovery into national conversation that could fundamentally alter how society understands historical narrative development and corporate influence over educational content. The weight of representing Elizabeth's legacy and modern victims creates pressure unlike anything she has experienced in academic career. Agent Martinez's final briefing emphasizes that public exposure represents point of no return for everyone involved in the investigation. Corporate retaliation will intensify as their suppression methods face scrutiny that could trigger congressional investigation and regulatory changes affecting entire industries built on narrative control. Maya must decide whether to accept personal risks involved in becoming public face of movement challenging institutional power that has operated successfully for generations. Elizabeth faced similar choice 2 centuries earlier when she decided to document scientific observations despite social prohibition that ultimately cost her life. In recognition, the historical parallel between Elizabeth's courage and Maya's decision creates emotional resonance that spans generations of women fighting for intellectual recognition against institutional forces determined to maintain status quo through intimidation and suppression. Elizabeth's journals provide both inspiration and warning about costs involved in challenging established power structures. Federal protection offers some security against corporate retaliation, but Agent Martinez acknowledges that sophisticated opponents can implement harassment campaigns through methods that law enforcement cannot always anticipate or prevent effectively. Character assassination, frivolous lawsuits, and professional blacklisting represent standard corporate tactics, refined through decades of successful researcher suppression. Maya thinks about Margaret's 60 years of protecting Elizabeth's materials while waiting for someone capable of bringing them to public attention. Her great-aunt's sacrifice preserved evidence across generations of family members who might have lacked courage or resources necessary for challenging institutional power successfully. The operational complexity requires Maya to trust federal agents, independent journalists, and academic allies whose coordination could either expose comprehensive conspiracy or create opportunities for corporate interests to eliminate threats through methods too sophisticated for individual resistance. Elizabeth's fate demonstrates the consequences of isolation when challenging institutional power without adequate support networks. Harrison's presence provides historical perspective and strategic guidance, but Maya recognizes that ultimate responsibility for Elizabeth's vindication rests with her decision to risk personal safety for ancestral justice. The brass key that began this journey feels warm in her pocket, connecting her to family courage that spans centuries of suppressed truth demanding recognition. Standing at the threshold of irrevocable action, Maya realizes she faces opportunity to fulfill promise made to Elizabeth's memory when first reading those remarkable journals hidden in Salem's attic. Her ancestor's voice has waited 2 centuries for courage to speak truth that institutional power spent generations suppressing through violence and intimidation. The clock approaches dawn as federal agents finalize coordination for raids that will either bring justice for systematic suppression or trigger retaliation that could destroy everyone involved in challenging corporate power. Maya's decision will determine whether Elizabeth's brilliant contributions finally receive recognition or remain buried beneath institutional conspiracy designed to protect profitable lies. Federal agents surround Meridian Academic Publishing's glass tower as dawn breaks over downtown Boston, their coordinated approach reflecting months of strategic planning designed to neutralize a suppression network that has operated in academic shadows for decades. Maya watches from a surveillance van as simultaneous raids begin across multiple cities, dismantling corporate infrastructure that enabled systematic intimidation of researchers whose discoveries threatened profitable historical narratives. Agent Martinez coordinates the complex operation through encrypted communications while ensuring evidence preservation and witness protection across multiple jurisdictions. Maya holds Elizabeth's original journals, preparing to present them as primary evidence of historical fraud and systematic suppression that spans 2 centuries of institutional abuse designed to protect corporate interests built on stolen intellectual property. Through the van's tinted windows, Maya observes federal agents escorting executives from the building in handcuffs, their shocked expressions revealing complete surprise at law enforcement's comprehensive understanding of their suppression activities. The scope of arrests exceeds everyone's expectations as university administrators, publishing executives, and private security contractors face charges for enabling decades of researcher intimidation. Maya's phone displays real-time notifications as news organizations simultaneously publish exposés based on leaked FBI evidence, creating information cascade that overwhelms corporate capacity for damage control or narrative manipulation. Elizabeth Whitmore begins trending on social media as users share articles about the suppressed scientist faster than corporate interests can coordinate counter-narratives. The federal courthouse becomes center of historic proceedings as Maya testifies before a judge about discovering Elizabeth's journals and the subsequent intimidation campaign that escalated from academic pressure to criminal activity. Her ancestors' authenticated materials serve as primary evidence of fraudulent historical narratives maintained through corporate conspiracy spanning multiple generations. Maya addresses the court with determination inherited from Elizabeth's courage, explaining how her ancestor documented species adaptation theories with scientific rigor that exceeded most contemporary male naturalists, whose work filled respected journals, while Elizabeth's contributions were systematically erased from historical records through family betrayal and institutional suppression. The courtroom gallery includes journalists, historians, and advocates who recognize this moment as unprecedented challenge to institutional suppression affecting researchers worldwide. Maya feels profound responsibility representing not just Elizabeth's legacy, but every researcher whose contributions were systematically marginalized through methods that continue affecting contemporary academic freedom. Federal prosecutors present comprehensive evidence of corporate conspiracy involving systematic harassment designed to protect textbook monopolies worth billions of dollars in educational sales. Recognition of Elizabeth's contributions would require curriculum revisions across multiple scientific disciplines, creating legal liability for decades of educational content that omitted women's achievements through deliberate suppression. Dr. Rodriguez testifies about authentication analysis that provides irrefutable scientific proof of the journal's historical authenticity, demolishing corporate claims about forgery through physical evidence that cannot be disputed by legal maneuvering or reputation attacks. Her testimony establishes Elizabeth as legitimate scientist whose contributions predated recognized evolutionary theory by decades. Thomas Fletcher appears in federal detention clothing, his guilty plea including detailed confession about corporate-sponsored intimidation campaigns affecting researchers across multiple institutions and disciplines. His testimony reveals operational methods refined through decades of successful suppression, while exposing networks that enabled systematic obstruction of academic freedom, protected under constitutional principles. Media coverage transforms Maya's personal research into national conversation about academic freedom, corporate influence over educational content, and systematic erasure of women's historical contributions from official narratives. Standing before reporters while holding Elizabeth's journals, Maya finally provides her ancestor with public recognition that was systematically denied through institutional conspiracy spanning 2 centuries. Harrison stands beside Maya during press conferences, vindicated after decades of investigating suppression patterns that colleagues dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theories. His persistence preserved evidence that enabled historic exposure of institutional corruption operating across multiple academic disciplines, while threatening researchers whose discoveries challenged established profitable narratives. Maya's phone displays messages from researchers worldwide sharing similar discoveries about suppressed historical figures whose contributions were systematically erased through methods documented in federal investigation. Elizabeth's story catalyzes broader examination of institutional knowledge control, extending far beyond American textbook publishing into international networks designed to maintain narrative monopoly. The federal investigation reveals Meridian's suppression network included 37 active participants across multiple institutions, with passive enablers numbering in hundreds of educators, administrators, and scholars who maintained silence about corporate intimidation in exchange for career protection and financial benefits provided through foundation grants and academic positions. Maya reads Elizabeth's final journal entry to packed university auditorium, sharing her ancestors' words, written days before forced commitment to psychiatric institution that became her grave. "If my voice is silenced, may another woman find these words and speak for all of us who dared to think beyond society's limitations. Truth survives oppression, even when individual voices do not." The audience responds with sustained applause, recognizing both Elizabeth's courage and Maya's persistence in bringing suppressed truth to public attention despite institutional retaliation designed to destroy anyone who challenged corporate narrative control. Dr. Vance approaches after the lecture with apologies for allowing external pressure to compromise academic judgment that should have protected student research. Maya's dissertation committee prepares to fast-track her defense based on groundbreaking research that exposes institutional suppression while establishing new standards for investigating historical bias in educational content development. Her academic vindication represents triumph over systematic efforts to destroy her career for challenging established historical narratives. Federal Task Force establishment provides ongoing protection for researchers investigating suppressed historical contributions while creating legal framework for prosecuting future intimidation campaigns targeting academic freedom. Maya's case establishes precedent that enables comprehensive response to corporate interference with scholarly investigation, protected under constitutional principles. Standing at Worcester State Hospital Memorial Park, Maya places flowers at newly installed plaque, recognizing Elizabeth Whitmore as pioneering scientist whose contributions were suppressed through systematic institutional abuse. Agent Martinez joins her at the memorial, having provided security during months of legal proceedings that resulted in criminal convictions and corporate restructuring. The location where Elizabeth died in obscurity has been transformed into an educational site commemorating patients who suffered institutional abuse, while highlighting continuing struggles for recognition affecting researchers whose discoveries threaten established power structures. Maya reads her ancestors' final journal entry aloud at the memorial, fulfilling promise to ensure Elizabeth's voice would never again be silenced. Federal convictions result in comprehensive restructuring of educational publishing industry, while establishing new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent future suppression of academic research. Settlement funds from corporate bankruptcy proceedings enable establishment of Elizabeth Whitmore Institute for Historical Justice, providing resources for documenting suppressed contributions across multiple disciplines and generations. Maya's transformation from failing graduate student to director of institute dedicated to recovering silenced voices demonstrates how individual courage can challenge institutional power when supported by legal framework protecting academic freedom. Elizabeth's recognition triggers educational reforms affecting millions of students worldwide who will learn accurate history, including women's contributions previously erased from official narratives. Social media campaigns inspired by Elizabeth's story create platforms for sharing suppressed researcher discoveries worldwide, generating movement that challenges institutional narrative control while celebrating intellectual contributions regardless of contributor identity. Silenced Voices becomes rallying cry for researchers facing contemporary intimidation, designed to maintain profitable historical interpretation. Maya understands she has fulfilled Elizabeth's deepest hope, expressed in journals hidden for 2 centuries in Salem attic. Her ancestors' prediction proved accurate. Suppressed voices eventually find ways to speak across generations when descendant courage refuses to accept institutional silence designed to protect powerful interests built on stolen intellectual property. The memorial visit provides closure for personal journey that began with inheritance of mysterious brass key but evolved into international movement challenging systematic suppression affecting researchers worldwide. Elizabeth's story demonstrates how individual discovery can expose institutional conspiracy while inspiring contemporary courage to challenge ongoing suppression of inconvenient truths. 1 year after discovering Elizabeth's journals in Salem's dusty attic, Maya sits in the same space transformed into research center dedicated to documenting suppressed women scientists worldwide. Shelves hold materials from researchers across 6 continents who have shared similar discoveries, creating archive of systematically erased contributions that demonstrates global patterns of institutional suppression spanning multiple centuries and academic disciplines. The Elizabeth Whitmore Institute for Historical Justice operates from Margaret's former home, funded by settlement money from Meridian Publishing's bankruptcy proceedings and federal grants supporting investigation of suppressed historical voices. Maya serves as director, coordinating international efforts to recover intellectual contributions that powerful interests spent generations erasing from official records. Through intimidation and institutional conspiracy, Dr. Harrison enters carrying correspondence from universities requesting curriculum revisions to include Elizabeth's scientific contributions, alongside other previously suppressed researchers whose recognition triggers comprehensive re-examination of educational content development. Recognition Maya fought for has expanded into movement challenging systematic bias embedded in textbook creation processes worldwide. Elizabeth's story appears in educational materials across 14 countries, with her botanical observations integrated into evolutionary biology curricula at graduate levels where future scientists learn accurate history, including women's contributions that predated celebrated male discoveries by years or decades. Her recognition forces acknowledgement of systematic theft that built scientific reputations on stolen intellectual property. Bias phone displays social media notifications where Silenced Voices has become platform for sharing suppressed researcher stories while challenging institutional narrative control affecting contemporary academics. The movement Elizabeth's recognition catalyzed continues expanding as families discover ancestor voices that institutional power attempted to erase through methods documented in federal investigation. Agent Martinez arrives with updates about federal task force investigations into historical suppression affecting 17 additional cases where researchers faced intimidation for discoveries threatening established profitable narratives. Elizabeth's precedent enables justice for scholars who experience similar corporate retaliation designed to maintain educational content monopolies through systematic suppression of inconvenient truths. Through attic windows, Maya observes visitors arriving for a weekly symposium about recovering suppressed historical voices, including historians, scientists, and family members who have discovered evidence of systematically erased ancestors whose contributions were stolen by institutional interests, protecting profitable narratives through multi-generational conspiracy. Maya examines letter from Elizabeth's former asylum, now museum, displaying her scientific contributions alongside recognition of institutional abuse suffered by countless women deemed mentally unstable for intellectual ambition that challenged social limitations designed to maintain male academic monopolies. The transformation demonstrates how suppressed voices eventually demand recognition, despite institutional efforts to maintain silence. Elizabeth's journals rest in climate-controlled case where visitors can view handwriting that survived 2 centuries of suppression attempts, testament to persistence of truth despite powerful efforts to maintain historical narratives that protect institutional interests built on stolen intellectual property. Her observations about natural selection remain relevant to contemporary scientific education. Maya opens Elizabeth's journal to first page, where her ancestor introduced herself with defiant determination to document scientific truth despite social prohibition that ultimately cost her life and recognition. The handwriting appears as vibrant as if written yesterday, connecting generations of women fighting institutional suppression through courage that refuses to accept silence. Reading Elizabeth's introduction aloud, Maya fulfills promise made in Salem Attic. Though society denies women the privilege of scientific inquiry, I shall document my observations in hope that future generations might recognize truth, regardless of its source. Elizabeth's voice wasn't silenced. It was waiting for the right moment to change the world.